Is quarterback Russell Wilson the cure for the New York Giants red zone woes from last season? Locked on Giants podcast starts now.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all of my written work. And as always, we welcome on in our Blue Crew community members, our everydayers, our newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And if you're making us your first listen of the day, we thank you for that as well. Today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com today to get started. All right, Giant fans, on today's program, we're going to take a look at the red zone. Now, last year, the Giants were just abysmal in the red zone. They finished last in the league in red zone conversion plays. We're going to take a look at the effects that Russell Wilson, as the starting quarterback, has already been named as the starting quarterback. What effects might he have on the red zone production moving forward? So we'll take a look at some history and try to gauge, whether or not he's going to be any better engineering drives down there in the red zone. So that'll be segment one. Then in segment two, we're going to talk a little bit about what I think the Giants are planning to do over the preseason. Now, you guys and gals know that I have been screaming at the top of my lungs for head coach Brian Daboll to play the starters and key reserves a little bit more than what he has the last couple of years. So I've got some data on that and some theories on that, which I will share with you in segment two. And then finally in segment three, just some miscellaneous stuff from training camp. The Giants on Tuesday, they didn't have a practice. I'll explain why coming up in segment three, but just some thoughts really on how training camp has gone and a couple of injury related notes and whatnot, personnel notes and all that stuff. So that is what we have planned for you today. Again, welcome on into the Locked On Giants podcast. All right, let's get into segment one. Can Russell Wilson help the Giants in the red zone? Now, let's go back to last year. I mentioned that the Giants were dead last in the red zone, converting 43.18% of their drives inside the 20 into scores. All right. Now, I broke that down to determine how they did passing wise, because I'm going to focus on the passing game more so than the running game. And I'll tell you why in just a moment. But in 2024, when passing inside the red zone, the Giants they had 62 dropbacks and they went 21 of 52 for 40.4% success rate. All right. They scored 8 touchdowns passing and they had 3 interceptions inside the red zone. All right. So really the passing game worse overall. Again, the total conversion rate was 43.18, but when passing, it was 40.4. Now, why do I bring all this up, and what does this have to do with Wilson other than the fact that he's going to be the starter? One of the head scratchers, or something that I should say that I'm kind of curious to see, is, with Russell Wilson, he's not a tall quarterback. And, when you're down in the red zone, obviously there's less ground for defenders to cover. They can muddy things up, create more of a forest, if you will, with hands in the air and whatnot. So I was kind of curious to see how Russell Wilson has done when he has gotten inside the red zone. And I went back and I looked at his stats from 2020 through 2024 to kind of get a good sample size on that. All right. So I broke it down to red zone and no red zone. So let's take a look at that, those numbers. All right. Starting with the no red zone plays. All right. Outside of the red zone. Russell Wilson, and these stats, by the way, are from True Media. Russell Wilson had 2,277 dropbacks. He went 1,937 attempts, had 1,283 completions. That's a 66.2% completion rate, 42 touchdowns, 34 interceptions, 197 sacks. All right. Now, in the red zone, Russell Wilson had 314 dropbacks, and he completed 163 out of 287 pass attempts. That's a 56.8% completion rate. So it's lower than when he's not in the red zone, right? He had 81 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, and was sacked 16 times. All right. So the scoring a little bit better, but the completion percentage not as good. Now, obviously, when we're talking about inside the red zone and just throwing in general, we've got to look at the time to throw, the average time to throw, and how they did with that. So again, just sticking with the red zone, I broke it down to less than 2.5 seconds, 2.5 being really the threshold, if you will, and then over 2.5 seconds. All right. So Russell Wilson, when he had less than 2.5 seconds to throw, 68 dropbacks, 87 of 123, which is a 70.7% completion rate. All right, not bad, right? Now, here's the thing, because Russell Wilson has kind of got a little bit of a reputation for holding on to the ball, particularly down in the red zone. So what was the rate down there? On pass attempts of 2.5 seconds or greater, Russell Wilson, over the same period that I've been talking about, that 2020 through 2024, Russell Wilson had 120 dropbacks, and he completed 56 of 112 pass attempts for a 50% completion rate. So what this tells us, a few things. Number one, the quicker the ball comes out of Russell Wilson's hand inside the red zone, the more likely the ball's going to get completed or the pass is going to get completed and a score can ensue. But if he's going to hold on to it, then that could be a problem. Now, to be fair to Russell Wilson, some of these passes in the red zone that didn't yield pay dirt, maybe they were drops, maybe the receiver ran the wrong route, maybe it was just a good play by the defense. So there's really no, definitive numbers on that, what percentage were his fault for not being completed and what percentage were just a result of other things. But I just found that these stats were kind of interesting because, again, when you're down in the red zone, this is where you probably want height on your side. And Russell Wilson, not a, I think he's 5'11", 5'10", or he's listed as. So he's not a very tall quarterback. And when you've got the defense bunching up in the middle of the field and on the edges there, it might be hard to find a receiver. So basically in the red zone, I had Russell Wilson taking one sack for every 19.6 dropbacks, whereas outside of the red zone, he took one sack for every 11.55 dropbacks. So a little better outside of the red zone than inside. But again, we'll see what the Giants do. How do they mitigate that? But I just found that kind of interesting, like I said, because ideally, like I said, you want a taller quarterback. Russell Wilson's not going to grow any further. So how will the Giants mitigate any concerns that might result from the red zone? And we'll see how it goes in the preseason. I do think Russell Wilson is going to get some snaps this preseason. Whether or not he gets them down into the red zone, that remains to be seen. But that's a stat we definitely want to keep an eye on, given the Giants' struggles last year in the red zone. Okay, coming up next, speaking of the preseason, will head coach Brian Daboll play his starters and his key reserves a little bit more than he has in the past? I'll give you my thoughts, and I'll give you some data about that. That's coming up right after this. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It is the best time of year. NFL kickoff is almost here, and that means fantasy football season is back in full swing. And this year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. This year, I'm playing it on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first timer or a veteran making your millionth league. Whether you're all in on something new or you like sticking to head leagues or just jumping into public leads, Yahoo's got you covered. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout the month of August. To kick it off, they just dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leads, which is a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's one team left standing. With the season around the corner, now is the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you're more into the classics, you can still play head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And the Giants on Tuesday, they didn't have a practice. They did have meetings and stuff like that. I'm going to go into that a little bit more because it's kind of, they're going into the regular season mode now. Really, I don't know how many fans realize this, but the first couple weeks is training camp mode where they're just going according to what the CBA allows them to do. And then once they get past those first 2 weeks and they lead into the preseason, they start to go or shape the schedule, I should say, more towards the regular season, just to get guys into the groove of things. And speaking of the preseason, a big question I get a lot is, will Brian Daboll play his starters and key reserves a little bit more than he has in the past? Daboll was asked that question on Monday, and he kind of hinted that he will. Didn't come right out and say he would, but he hinted that he would. All right. And, of course, he always says, oh, we'll discuss it as a staff. And you just know the last day of media access before the game, he's going to say, oh, we're going to talk about it tonight, which, of course, means that the media won't have a chance to ask him about it because by then the week will be over for the media and it'll be game time and then post game. But I think what Daboll is going to do, and just kind of based on what he did last year, whenever there is a joint practice scheduled, he tends to not play the starters and key reserves as much. Whereas when there is no joint practice scheduled, he does. All right. Now this year, the Giants, the only joint practices they have scheduled, week 2 of the preseason against the Jets. So I would not be surprised if we don't see the starters much in week 2. I do think we will see the starters in week 1. Okay. We won't see all of them. So you're not going to see, for example, Malik Neighbors or Dexter Lawrence or, maybe, basically the guys that they know what they got in them. All right. You're not going to see those guys. You're going to, especially with Malik Neighbors and the receiver group, you want guys to compete. You want to see the bottom of that depth chart where maybe the competition's a little stiff. So it doesn't pay to play Malik Neighbors when you know what you got in him and you're still trying to figure out what you want to do at the bottom of the depth chart. Okay. I think in week 3, though, we will see maybe a semi-dress rehearsal because, look, I've said it before and said it again. You cannot go more than, I would say, 10 days between football games. All right. And that is a mistake that this team has made in the past. And I don't have to tell you guys that they have got to get off to a fast start once the regular season starts. Okay. They've got 2 games against NFC East opponents, Washington up first, Dallas up next on the road. They got to come out at least 1-1 in those 2 games, if not 2-0. All right. Now let's kind of focus on week 1 with Washington. All right. And I'm going to give you some numbers in a minute. But last year, the Giants lost both games to Washington by a score of 8 points. All right. A combined score, 8 points. Washington is beatable. I know they look, like really good last year. They went 12-5. Jaden Daniels looked like, unstoppable. Washington is beatable, folks. I really believe that. So I went back and I did a little digging into Washington's history. Okay. Washington, of their 5 losses last year, they did not score first in 2 of them. Also, in their 5 losses last year, in the first quarter, they had a combined score of 20-16. Now, why do I bring that up? Because the Giants, when it has come to games last year, whether it's week 1 or week 16, they get off to a slow start. And that's got to change. All right. Some numbers for you. The Giants in the first quarter of games since 2023, they have a minus 123 point differential in the first quarter. That is the worst in the NFL over that span. All right. So basically, the Giants come out of the chute and they look like they're still in training camp mode. And that cannot continue to happen. It just can't. This team has got to get out. They've got to score right away. They can't sit there and warm things up, because if they should fall to 0-2 in those first 2 games, they're going to have a big hole to climb out of. I've said before, the trick, or the key, I should say, to getting to the postseason, you've got to take care of business in your division. And if you go 0-2 to start the season, that's quite the hole to have to dig out of. Okay, so that takes us back to the preseason reps. Now, I get it. You don't want to put guys out there because there's a concern about injuries and, let's see what you got at the bottom of the roster. I get all that. But you know what? Injuries don't discriminate. I've said this before. They don't discriminate. A guy is going to get hurt in practice just as much as he has a chance of getting hurt in the game. Look at what happened to poor Bryce Ford Wheaton. He got hurt on grass during practice. Okay? There's just no bubble wrapping these guys. So you just can't go about being reluctant or scared to put your guys out there. If injuries are going to happen, unfortunately, they're part of the game, and they're going to happen. And it doesn't matter what you do or how cautious you are or how protective you are. They're going to happen. That's just a reality. All right. So that being said, I'm not saying that the Giants should put out guys who are nursing bumps and bruises, especially guys who are key. I mentioned, Dexter Lawrence, they don't need to put him out there. Malik Neighbors, if that shoulder is still bothering him, which I don't think it is because he's been able to practice, don't put him out there. Don't put out, Darius Slayton, who's dealing with something. You might want to hold back Cam Scatterboo, who's dealing with what's reported to be a hamstring. But don't be afraid to play the other guys. The offensive line, the starting offensive line, especially getting those guys out there. Quarterback Russell Wilson, who, needs to get some work in there. Definitely getting Jackson Dart out there so he can experience live reps. There are benefits to live reps in preseason. And the goal, obviously, you want to come out as healthy as you can, but you can't be afraid of that. And I know you're probably saying, but Pat, this Giants team has been injury prone the last how many years? Why take the chance? Well, that's just what life's all about. If you're going to be afraid, if you're going to be reluctant, you're not going to go very far. So that's why I think Daboll is going to maybe be a little bit more liberal with playing some of his starters, getting them some work. It doesn't have to be every week. It doesn't have to be for the entire game. Maybe the starters against Buffalo, they only play 1/4. That's fine. Let them get into a groove. Maybe in the dress rehearsal against New England in week 3, maybe they play, I don't know, a half, or maybe into the third quarter. Whatever it is, every little bit helps. Okay. This is a team that isn't a juggernaut. This isn't like, the Philadelphia Eagles, which is kind of a solid team with a lot of their guys returning and the same, philosophies, and they're building on stuff. The Giants got to play catch up, and it starts in the preseason. All right. Coming up next, some miscellaneous takeaways, final thoughts from the Giants training camp, from the practices, the injury situations, some roster personnel moves. That's coming up right after this. Hey, Giant fans, summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must watch events. New to FanDuel? New customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. So go on, open the FanDuel app today or visit fanduel.com/locked on to get started. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and the Giants take on the Buffalo Bills Saturday, first preseason game. And of course, we will have a show for you after that game. I'll have takeaways, some thoughts about who stood out, who didn't. So yeah, we're getting into the regular weekly swing of things. About time, right? It seems like it's taken forever to get to this point. So I'm really excited about that. All right. Now, in this segment, just a few leftovers, if you will, from training camps, just general thoughts and whatnot. I want to start off by just kind of mentioning the injury impact. Knock on wood, and hopefully I don't jinx them, but the injury impact so far, I think it's kind of centered more on special teams than anything. And I say that because you look at who the Giants have kind of lost, all right? They've lost Bryce Ford Wheaton, their top gunner, to the season ending Achilles injury. They also put Ty Summers, linebacker, on injured reserve. He was their leading tackler on special teams. Now, to be honest with you, and I hate to, say this, but they did bring in Chris Board, who's a special teams ace. So I wasn't too sure if Ty Summers was going to make the roster anyway. I am a little concerned at this point. Do they have a suitable gunner to replace Bryce Ford Wheaton? I don't know that they do, but we'll see once the games start. Okay, so the Giants to replace Ty Summers, and also they waived Rashawn Baker, the running back. They waived him injured. So they signed Jonathan Ward, a running back, to give them some depth because really, with Baker injured and Cam Scatterbo dealing with what's reported to be a hamstring issue. And again, he's probably not going to play, I would think, this week. Also, you have Eric Gray on the PUP list. So the Giants needed some depth at running back. So now they've got Tyrone Tracy, Devin Singletary, Dante Miller, and now they have Jonathan Ward to round out the running back depth. They also signed KJ Cloyd, linebacker, to the roster. Now, KJ Cloyd, if the name sounds familiar, he was a guy who was on the roster or actually on the practice squad last year. And he, in fact, was the team's leading tackler during last preseason, all right, the 2024 preseason. So a little bit of familiarity. Usually when the Giants, they have an injury and they got to bring somebody in, and, they usually tend to go for guys who know their offense or their defense, whatever position it is they're trying to fill. It's kind of a quick solution so that they don't have to lose too much ground, especially if the depth takes a hit. So those were the personnel transactions they made. Now, a few other thoughts, from the practices. A lot of people have asked me about Evan Neal and Jackson Dart. Evan Neal, as I've said many times, as a run blocker, the man blocks out the sun, right? He's that good. His pass pro, still, I think, a work in progress inside at guard. It's coming along, but needs a little bit more work. So I'm very curious to see how he does in the preseason games, especially in pass pro. I do think he's going to get the start over Greg Van Roten, who, by the way, returned after, being excused for a couple of days for the birth of his second child, a daughter, by the way. So I think we'll see Evan Neal and a lot of him at guard because he needs the reps, and that the pass protection is the one big question mark I have about Evan Neal. Now, just real quick about Jackson Dart. The kid, you can see the game is slowing down for him, but there are still far too many instances where he holds onto that ball forever. When he is not sure, do I throw it? Do I eat the sack? Do I take off? That's going to come with more reps. That's why you're probably going to see him get a lot of reps, right? So there's a lot more they can learn, and preseason obviously is the next step. The preseason games, the next step for Jackson Dart. But overall, I would say you got to be happy with where he is and how he's coming along. I think he's going to be a good one once he puts it all together. But right now, there's still a few rough spots in his game that he needs to smooth out, if you will. Okay, Giant fans, that is going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on Locked On Giants, or if you made us your first listen of the day, we appreciate it. For your next listen, check out Locked On Bets. Betting experts Lee Sterling and Kevin Rodgers have daily MLB locks and can't miss football features. Find Locked On Bets on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Giant fans, I'll be back tomorrow with an all-new episode of Locked On Giants. Until then, thank you so much for tuning in and have a good one.